All right, hi, this is the Sunday video for Good Country People. This story by Flannery O'Connor that we're going to be focusing on this week. I recorded this video earlier, but I'm realizing there was no sound, so I'm redoing it quietly while my kids are sleeping in the next room. I love this story that I assigned. I think that Flannery O'Connor's work in general, it perhaps is my favorite of the short story writers we're going to encounter this year. O'Connor writes from a very Catholic space. She is really interested in themes of redemption, salvation, and especially in righteousness, sort of self-superiority that she sees in the characters that she draws. And we see that in Joy Holga, in Mrs. Hopewell, and even in Mrs. Freeman. There is this sense of haughtiness, a moral superiority that they each have in their own ways, and they're often diametrically opposed in their belief systems, and yet the thing that unites them the most is this pride. And then comes Manly Pointer, the Bible salesman, who is the con man, the liar, and in him, the authenticity of his deceit, the way he's willing to admit it so clearly, gleefully, that is the salvation that's being offered by the story. So it's right in the middle of what O'Connor is trying to do, I think, that I find to be so compelling. So we'll dive into it a little bit here. O'Connor writes Joy Holga as this character who isn't likable, but very attractive. You want to know what's going to happen to her. And when you see what happens to her, there is a mix of fascination and empathy. O'Connor herself, I think, finds that empathy with Joy. She writes to her friends that, but for the grace of God, she is who I would have become. So the character she's drawing is an extension of herself, the way that if O'Connor hadn't been righted or humbled at other moments in her life, she feels she could have been. And so we see Joy Holga humbled in this story, but unlike O'Connor, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with Joy. There are 4 characters that are worth your study, and that's what I'm asking you to do with a creative analysis this week. So we're really still looking at characterization this week. We're thinking about these same components that drove us last week, but I'm adding in 2 more elements, the elements of perspective and motive. So your analysis will be to pick one of these 4 characters and to write a paragraph about a quote that you see connected to them. And that's as simple as it is. We're going for depth in your thinking. We're going for originality, not concerned about craft, not concerned about organization, just concerned about uncovering some thought that's underneath the character that you choose. So just like last week, these components guide us in our reading. We're interested in the physical attributes of character, the emotional attributes of character, the psychological ones, and then the intellectual ones. But today, I want us to think about perspective and motive. And we'll define those things as what shapes and drives character. So perspective for character is shaped by 3 things: their background or history, what they've been through, their personality traits, what you might say are immutable characteristics, disposition, what you're naturally inclined to do. And lastly, the relationships or the roles that they play in the story. All of that is what shapes the character. And then what drives the character, the future orientation, is motive. What helps them move towards something, or what do they move towards? So the things in red are our focus. How do you look for those things? The same places you're going to find the other components that I introduced last week. 3 places. The narrator's description of the character, it's that omniscient perspective. The perspective in this case happens to be omniscient, 3rd person, but even if it were a 1st person voice, you're looking for what the narrator has to say about character. What other characters say about the character? We get a lot of those moments in this story. We get Mrs. Hopewell telling other characters what she thinks of the Bible salesman or what she thinks of Joy, Holga, those moments. The dialogue between characters reveals a lot as well. And then the character themselves, their actions, their thoughts, and their dialogue. So looking at those components and considering your 4 characters, begin to think about who it is that you'd like to study. Again, you're considering these components, perspective and motive, and you're trying to draw that all together into, as we learned last week, kind of collection of thoughts, though they don't need to be so formal as the claim paragraphs. So here's some models. I'll do 2 models. Mrs. Hopewell, the mother character. First, her perspective, and I'm going to do each bullet point. She's shaped by her background, her history. So the background that drives her, it's partly the way that she sees herself on the land. She wants to have someone to walk over the fields with her. It's important for her to feel like she has that partner as she moves through her space. One might ask, well, why not her daughter? But we sort of know the answer to that a little, but we could dig into it. We see her personality traits through a lot of self-talk. She herself calls herself a woman of great patience. She had no qualities that were bad. Those are interesting personality traits to oneself. And we find them in her own internal monologue or in the narrator, depending on how you look at it. And in the relationships and roles that she plays, there's 3 that come to mind for me. The fact that she is Christian is important to her, not so much as a way of seeing the world, but as a way that she wants to be identified. So even though she tells the Bible salesman, my Bible is up by my bedside table, and that was not the truth. The Bible was in the attic somewhere. Even though that's something that she knows on some level, she still wants the Bible salesman to perceive her as a Christian like him. And then this second point, being a mother, is wrapped up in her identity that informs her perspective. When she sees Joy, she thinks of her still as a child because it breaks her heart to think otherwise. So her role as the shepherd caretaker for Joy, Holga, is critically important to her, even though Joy rejects it. And lastly, her role as a moral beacon, somebody who people look to for moral guidance. Though it's not true, that's how she sees herself. Lord, she says, that Bible salesman just bored me to death, but he was so sincere and genuine, I couldn't be rude to him. So it's really important to her that she maintain a high level of civility, moral civility to the people in her community, even if it's not authentic, even if she doesn't really believe it, that she's going to keep up those appearances as being kind, that the appearance of being kind is far more important to her than being kind in and of itself. So all of this comes together into her motive. And for me, in identifying, okay, so what drives her then? Knowing all of that, what is the thing that she seeks above all? I think it's this stability of her identity. It's really important to her that her self-identity remains stable because she has polished it up in a way that is just right. The only thing about her life she would change is her daughter. Of course, that's going to have all sorts of consequences for her relationship with her daughter. But for herself, where one character might be open-minded or, on the other hand, meek, insecure, Mrs. Hopewell is not. She is very secure in herself and sees no need for anything about herself to change. All right, so there's one model of me making my way through perspective and motive. Another, it's tight and short for you as a kind of example of what you could write rather than think through. So this one is for Joy, Holga. And it's a model I took from another student. Joy says in this moment of intensity, woman, do you ever look inside? Do you ever look inside and see what you are not, God? I mean, she recognizes what we just went over here. Malebranche was right. We are not our own light. We are not our own light. There's such power, passion, intensity in this outburst. And I write, or not me, I modify the student's writing. This quote reveals a deeply hidden and unrealized truth for Holga. She has a subconscious desire to believe in a God. Throughout the story, Mrs. Hopewell and the narrator repeatedly describe Holga as an atheist, and many of her actions support that description. But in this quote, Holga reveals she does not really want to be an atheist. She wants to believe there is a greater power in the world. Perspective, and motive. Here, I'm more driven to write about motive. You can write about either. You can choose to do both. It depends. Sometimes they work so intrinsically together that you can't separate them. That's what your task is, though, and I hope that it's fun to think through this with one of the characters that you found to be really interesting. I look forward to reading those on the discussion board, and also please do copy them in your BGDs. All right?